Today, we are going to go into supplements, and this is probably one of the biggest topics that we get asked, right? We always go through the plan. We always kind of have a consult call or anything, and it's like, will you help me with supplements? What do I need to do about supplements? So I think, this is going to be really, really useful for you to understand, well, first of all, what a supplement is, where to focus your time and attention, and also what is worth the money, right? And we get into a lot of really the sort of background to supplements, how they came to be, how they work, how they're tested to show if they're effective or not. And also in a world of social media and sort of pro marketing, we succumb to claims which often aren't backed by any real science. So I think you're going to leave this with a really good understanding around what you could potentially use for yourself. So a lot of the time we're met with confusion, maybe fear of missing out. I think a lot of the ones sort of at the moment is around creatine. Everyone's taking creatine. Should I take it? So there is that general fear of everyone else is doing it. I'm missing out on potential gains or potential results there. There's also the excitement, right? I know for myself, I'm sure Marvin too, when we were younger, going into a supplement store was kind of like Christmas in a way. It was like going into a candy store for us. There's obviously the desire to optimize, right? And I think a lot of you have shared sort of notes when you were booking in for this call around how, even if things may not be the best that they are, will supplements still help? Is it still worth taking them? So we get into that. And I think also it's worth remembering that, how you're like how to frame supplements, because if it's a quick fix or a shortcut, that again is something that isn't necessarily true. So it's about managing expectations there. Obviously, there's a big thing around value for money. Is it really worth it for an extra 1% improvement in terms of fatigue or strength or recovery? So you kind of balance that out for yourselves. And then also goal dependent, right? We go into the different categories of supplements as well. So you're aware of, am I doing this for more general health and well-being, not necessarily to lose fat, for example? Am I doing this for more performance gains? Again, not necessarily to lose fat, but get stronger and build muscle mass and all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of different elements to this that we will be getting into. But I think from my side, literally half an hour ago, I was thinking around what are some of the supplements that I have been gullible for, that I've spent a lot of money on, and probably wish I didn't. And I know Marvin's sort of laughing here because he was also in the rugby world, so I'm sure where he was, there's probably a lot of crossover here. But I remember the first protein that I took was this one on the left, Maxi Muscle Cyclone. And, the word around school was it's fucking serious. There's no messing around. It's proper stuff. And it was damn expensive at the time. I remember it was the equivalent of like, 300 reals for like a kilo. Another one is like a pre-workout, and this was all the range. There was also this LA Muscle Norothine, right? And that was like a testosterone booster, right? All it was a bunch of herbs put together, which did absolutely nothing. But the way, it was sort of phrased is like it's an anabolic, powerful growth product, right? And so we get into this, and this is like what, 15 years ago, over like probably nearly 20 years ago, where the marketing was as it was, and it's still kind of ticking the boxes of what you want, a powerful anabolic growth product. As a teenager, that sounds fucking awesome. That sounds like I'm going straight to mirror muscles and everything else. And then also just some other ones like fat burners. Again, huge waste of money. Basically just green tea extract and caffeine, BCAAs, branched chain amino acids. So I think I want to preface this presentation by saying, we have all been at a point where we are taken by the hype. We're taken by the promise of something, too good to be true in a way, because we want that extra, we want that sort of quicker, faster result. And so supplements a lot of the time are sold as basically like a bit of a shortcut to that. So I'm not sure if any of these products actually still exist, to be honest, but I'm sure they're still going with new formulations and new claims and new bullshit and so on. But anyway, Al-Muhim, what we'll cover today. So, what a supplement is, how it fits into what it is that we're doing together, why food always comes first, and when it is a good time to use supplements. How to know if you actually need something. We take away the guesswork and actually come from a place of knowing, and also what are some of the common nutrient deficiencies, especially here, in the GCC countries. How to evaluate supplement quality, and also to understand that just because a product says something, it doesn't make it true, right? And the supplement industry is incredibly sort of badly regulated. And we'll get into a little bit of that in the future. And like, to be honest, tomorrow I could find a white label protein product and start branding it up and selling it as this whole sort of aspirational brand. There's nothing good about the product, but it just comes from the marketing side of things. And then we finish with a practical framework, when to use supplements versus not. So I'll pass over to Marvin here, as he did a bit of a deep dive into the history. And I think well, no, we'll go back into that in a moment. But anyway, over to you, Marvin.
All right. So I am coming into this with a little bit of yeah, some stories, some interesting stories as well. Just because my first job, funny enough, was in a supplement store, 18, 19 years old, fresh out of high school, trying to play professional rugby, looking for a job before I got a contract. And so I literally lived behind a desk, waiting for people to walk in, and trying to sell them supplements. So as we go along, I'll try and throw in some funny stories along the way. So essentially, a supplement is a concentrated source of a nutrient to complement the diet and not replace whole foods. It may contain vitamins, minerals, amino acids, herbs, botanicals, enzymes, probiotics, in a more potent or purified form, such as pills, powders, capsules, liquids. And even nowadays, I believe a lot of supplement companies are selling them in gummies, just essentially just for adherence, right? To make people eat like be more consistent with taking their supplements. They're designed to fill gaps, support performance, enhance specific health outcomes, and not actually to serve as your primary nutrient source. So it's a supplement and not the actual whole picture, right? So it's really, really important to outline that. And then it's also important to distinguish supplements from medications, right? They're not meant to treat, cure any sort of diseases. And just because of the regulatory framework or lack of, the quality and purity can vary significantly from brand to brand. So a little history lesson on supplements.
It makes a change to the science lessons we usually give, huh?
I think this is more interesting, right? It's yeah, very, very different. So about 100 years ago today, the first supplement was created, right? Vitamin D. And so obviously in the earlier 20th century. And it's just really interesting how over the years, this has essentially just evolved, right? So went from someone isolating vital amines to, vitamins, which is what we know today. And that sort of sparked the initial interest in nutrition science, therefore supplements and so on and so forth that we know today. Commercial production of these vitamins just became common, and especially around, during the wars, World War I and II, where nutrient preservation was really critical for soldiers, obviously to keep them alive, to keep them functioning well, during combat. And then the fitness culture came into the picture after the war. Bodybuilding became a really big thing, and they really, really popularized, supplements. And then sports nutrition, of course, because now these brands are getting created, these companies are creating supplements off the back of this, right? To essentially benefit from the boom. And
I think it's
then
a little different now, I think, sort of this decade and sort of probably the previous one. But I think in that's probably the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it was very much probably two audiences for supplements, right? There was the bodybuilders, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, that everyone wanted to be like them. Or there was the kind of maybe especially in the States, the housewife needing to lose weight. And so these have been the two huge markets that supplements, I guess, initially started in. And now I think, as Marvin will sort of touch on, it's much more mainstream. It's literally for everyone. So back to you.
Yeah, which is interesting with, like as Pete said, right? We now into the phase of going from bodybuilders, you know, housewives trying to lose body fat, and now into biohacking. Like everyone and anyone is like a fitness influencer. Everyone and anyone knows about everything there is to know about fitness, and everyone and anyone is trying to biohack their way into a better life or live longer or live forever, really. There's this guy called Brian Johnson that's on this kick of like trying to live forever, spending like millions of dollars annually. But also, it's just really interesting to see how from a more of a financial point of view, right? Like if you there's one phrase that I've heard before, something to the tune of if you follow the money, you will know why, or you will know where things are going. And so, like, I mean, clearly, from the 60s, $1 billion, 80s, 4 billion, that's, and then all the way to the 2000s where it's, 20x plus, and then 170 billion, and then now projected to be 300 plus billion dollars, like worth of an industry purely just on supplements. So it just goes to show you that the bottom line is really, really what is driving this industry. Of course, we saw sports performance just playing a key role in the growth of supplements as well. Obviously, as athletes became professional and that sort of went on as well, they needed to have some sort of supplementation. So it's just really interesting to kind of have that contrast of where it was to where it is and where it's going.
And I think previously, in terms of like where people got their information from, that they needed supplements, basically was magazines, right? Fitness magazines. It was really quite niche. However, now it's literally every other scroll you have on Instagram is it's either kind of running electrolyte performance or creatine or this or that, and it's literally in your face every day. So I think in terms of like getting into the psyche of the general population, it's much more prevalent. And even if you're not searching the information out, you're going to be served the information. And so I'll sort of take over here. And this is something that I think, contributed hugely to the growth from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And I'm not sure if anyone here has heard this. Maybe this is more of a kind of, I guess, bodybuilder focused element whereby there was this study which basically kind of found that if you don't have protein 30 minutes, up to, 30 to 60 minutes after a workout, and the workout's basically wasted, because there's an increase in protein muscle synthesis for that duration after a workout. And if you don't get protein in, then it's you're not recovering and it's wasted. And so the supplement companies jumped on this, right? Because there they have like a need for their product. And so what happened is they hammered home that point of, this is your post-workout shake, right? We all know that language, post-workout shake. If you don't have your post-workout shake, the workout is wasted. And what's the point? So I remember when I was younger, I would literally go home because I forgot my post-workout shake. So it was really ingrained in everyone that if you miss this opportunity, then you lose your gains, right? And so what actually then has been, come to the forefront is it's less of this anabolic window and more of a barn door, right? So you don't need to stress about protein directly after a workout, otherwise you're going to lose your gains. But what is more important than this exact timing is the total protein intake over the course of the day. So this is why, we always say it's important to get your protein in first thing in the morning and then through the day, etc., so that you hit your target across the course of the day, rather than leaving it later and then, missing out on the total protein intake. So I think, that's just something for you to understand, that marketing can have such a big sort of push in this, but also it's worth looking at the science for yourself. And I think as we come into later on, the science now has never been so easily accessible, right? You don't need to look at peer-reviewed studies and all this kind of stuff because you've got other means to do so. And we'll get into that as well. Other means being obviously myself and Marvin, but also other sort of platforms too, which we'll share with you.
But Pete, isn't it interesting how so it's not necessarily that the supplement companies are twisting the study or creating their own. They're actually using what is like what's true, but then they are they're finding something very specific to like make it seem like that is the only thing that the study found. And
Yes,
yet in reality, there's a much broader spectrum. And if you need to actually have a lot more context rather than just that little clip that they'll take
it
from
is
the.
cherry picking, I believe it's called,
Yes,
right?
that's it. That's the term. So we have three main types of supplements. I mean, there are various others, but just basically we've condensed them into these three main categories, right? So health supplements, your vitamins, minerals, omega-3s, probiotics, greens powder, basically anything that helps with wellness and deficiency prevention. And then you've got performance supplements on the other end of the spectrum, where things that essentially boost your performance, right? Creatine, caffeine, and so on and so forth. But then there's also that overlapping type of supplement, right? So where creatine, as you know, Pete has already alluded to, there's a lot of research and science that's sort of coming out around creatine, as well as obviously influences. Everyone's kind of talking about it, the craze of creatine for mental focus. I was actually digging into creatine for helping with like sort of recovery from concussions, obviously having played professional sport for, well, contact sport for a decent amount of time. And there's a lot of talk about, creatine being helpful for that. So, that sort of crossover of those supplements. And then we have what we've essentially spoken about ad nauseum, where supplements are the cherry on top, right? We have essentially our foundation, our true foundation, which are the pillars that drive the results, behaving your way to the results, if you will. So we have quality nutrition, right? Strength training, daily movement, and sleep. And those four things cannot and will never be replaced by supplements. No supplement can magically make you lose body fat. None is ever going to make you put on X amount of muscle, or replicate any sort of adaptation you get from strength training. Daily movement obviously impacts metabolic health, blood circulation, energy expenditure, far more than any supplement. And of course, sleep, right? Of course, there's, supplements that can aid with your sleep, but we don't want these to be a band-aid, right? You still want the root issue to be solved or resolved, which is sleeping. So yeah, really, really a bit of a Debbie Downer.
I know, right? And I think this is a great analogy, maybe overdoes it a little bit. But if you've got a car and the tires are falling off, the wheels are falling off, the battery is nearly dead, maybe you've got a broken mirror and this and that. It doesn't matter if you're going to put the most premium, most luxury oil into it. If you're not looking after, the body, the big stuff, then it's not going to run, right? So I want you to think about supplements in this kind of way. If there is, low consistency, low adherence, strength training isn't happening, you've got poor sleep, then, sticking a band-aid on it is not necessarily going to help, irrespective of, if it's a 5% improvement. If you're at 20%, 30% of consistency, a supplement isn't going to do what needs to be done to actually get you seeing changes. So I thought, would hammer home that point. I know we always say it, as Marvin said, ad nauseum, but we will get into the stuff that we do recommend. So I'll pass over to you, Marvin, here.
So, what questions should I be asking, right? And what we often get is, what should I take? When in reality, the question should actually be, what am I missing? And so the best way to know what you are missing is through blood work. So going and getting your blood work done by your medical provider, medical practitioner, and sort of being able to chat with them around what your deficiencies are. Speaking of deficiencies, it'll largely shine a light on, vitamin and mineral levels. Because when you do the blood panel, obviously they draw the blood and then they're able to figure out what you're struggling in, what you're deficient in, what you need to potentially supplement. It obviously identifies levels of iron, B12, magnesium, omega-3s, vitamin D, amongst many others. And they each require and obviously a unique plan. So we've got a table here of common deficiencies. And obviously, we won't go through every single one and why it's common, health implications, food sources. But essentially, it's really interesting to see that with the micronutrient, so that is a common deficiency. So iron, vitamin A, iodine, zinc. I think we got vitamin D on the other page. And then how it's interesting that on the other end of the spectrum, we've got food sources, right? We haven't gone directly to say the supplement that can help with that micronutrient. So it just goes to show that you still can use food first again, another one of our pillars and foundations. And only then afterwards can you then go on to supplementation. So also, and most of these foods are going to be foods that, if you're familiar with the What Should I Eat guide, majority of these foods are going to be on the green side, right? So the things that we want to eat the most, we want to eat, good quality meats, chicken, that type of stuff, eggs. We want to get nutrient dense food, fruits, vegetables that are so, so rich in these micronutrients that are going to be very, very important for our overall health. So, vitamin D as an example, Pete, this is an interesting one, right? Have you noticed any very, very obvious things with people potentially lacking vitamin D on this side of the world, despite having the sun all year round?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think sort of a large portion of clients are, when I was doing it in person, are sort of vitamin D deficient. There is a sort of a night culture, as we know. Plus, also, why would you want to go outside when it's so hot? And so, the sort of irony is that, your body makes vitamin D from exposure to sunlight. And so we don't necessarily have a problem with sunlight here, but, the vitamin D deficiency is quite common.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, it's not only like there's also sort of a knock-on effect, right? So if you don't get sunlight in the morning, kind of like when we spoke about the sleep in the group call, when we spoke about sleep, if you don't get sunlight in the morning, your body's not able to then produce melatonin later on for you to then fall asleep. So it's really, really important for sleep as well. So we looked at some studies on the GCC, obviously the context of where we live, and it's really, really interesting that well, the rest of the world is 30 to 50% deficient in vitamin D. But on this side of the world, essentially a meta-analysis was done on vitamin D in the Middle East. So meta-analysis is essentially a study of studies. So this one was studying 44 studies, which essentially makes it significantly more comprehensive than just a one study, right? As opposed to just doing one and extrapolating whatever, you've got multiple where you can then gather all the data. And yeah, the findings are that the most people are below the healthy cutoff line. I think it was like 60+%. And so I also then kind of went back and forth looking at the charts and seeing how like which population. So the older people and like babies are significantly more deficient than most, obviously because they're not going out as much. But it's really, really interesting to see this on this side of the world.
And I think when, a lack of vitamin D or deficiency has been, related to or associated to things like depression and sort of mood sort of disorders, it's kind of unsurprising that, I think I kind of talk about this a little bit on some consultations, is like, how would you make someone depressed? Right? You wouldn't let them go outside and see sunlight. You wouldn't let them train or exercise. You wouldn't let them eat good, nutritious, healthy, nutrient-rich food. You'd kind of take them away from their friends. You'd keep them indoors. And so all of these different components can have that knock-on effect to sort of all things mood, basically. So I think it's, important to know that it's not just about, fat loss or muscle gain, but some of these vitamins and minerals are going to be imperative to actually, have a sort of a thriving body, and you're not just getting by on calories.
Yeah, which there's also more anecdotal kind of fun fact that I was reading, actually heard this ages ago, about how at some point somewhere this hospital basically figured out that if they put their patients or sort of have their patients closer to the windows where they get sunlight, people actually spend significantly less time in the hospital admitted because they're getting vitamin D and they're getting sunlight. So, the feel-good hormones start to come, recovery increases as well. And of course, like Pete has mentioned, depression is sort of reduced. Pete, you want to talk about marketing versus science?
Absolutely. So funnily enough, like Marvin used to work in a supplement store, and I used to work in marketing. So I think we're part of the problem,
Well,
really.
yeah.
So in a world of outrageous social media clickbait, hyperbole, celebrity endorsements, weak regulatory standards, low barrier to entry, and now AI optimization, really the tried and tested, honest products are often seen as boring and unsexy. And that's not too dissimilar to training, right? People who always see stuff on TikTok or Instagram and are like, oh, I should try this training, I should try this training. Like the basics are the basics for a reason. The fundamentals in terms of your squat, your lunge, your hinge, your press, your push, all of that kind of stuff, your pull, there's certain exercises which are going to give the biggest bang for your buck. Right. And so these fancy, exciting, trending exercises, just because they look good on Instagram, are not going to necessarily deliver the results. But the boring stuff, the fundamental stuff is boring. And so it's very similar with nutrition and supplements here. So generally, the exciting, trending, FOMO driving products with big marketing budgets and unsupported claims often draw the most attention and obviously then take our money. And so we've got a couple of examples here, which I thought I would sort of share as being relevant. We've obviously got the Liver King on the left-hand side. I'm sure you've probably seen him in your time scrolling on social media. But, as Marvin said at the beginning, you generally just have to follow the money. Right. People aren't necessarily doing things out of the goodness of their heart or because they actually, believe in it most of the time. They're doing it for the dollar bills and for the money. And so you had someone like the Liver King who, was saying his gains, his muscle mass was purely from, looking after the fundamentals. And I think if you look at him, you probably would argue that there's probably something more going on. And eventually, actually, it came out that he was on steroids, even though he had sort of at length aggressively denied it. And obviously, what he's selling here is a product, right? The Whole Feast. So it is a protein-based supplement that, takes the nutrients from organ meats, right? Which he kind of claims are the best sources of this and that. So, his brand, his sort of thing is all about, selling obviously a product, which is a multi-million pound business. Equally, you've got things like, celebrity endorsements, whether it's Kim Kardashian or whatever it is. And I think, you see someone taking a supplement and you assume that that's then how they got their body or their hair or their skin or their nails or whatever it is. And, 9.9 times out of 10, it's not, right? So I think there needs to be an element of being critical, definitely being skeptical as well, and generally, asking more questions or asking the right questions. And what we'll go into is, and I know a couple of people asked about particular supplements in the questions when they were signing up for the meeting. And we'll kind of delve into that a little bit, but we touched on this earlier, whereby, brands and marketing can move a lot faster than science and regulation. So usually there is a cherry-picked result or finding from maybe one study about a particular compound or a misunderstood physiological process. And then this is spun into like the next big supplement that has just been discovered, right? And what begins as this small physiological benefit or benefit in theory becomes this headline claim. It's repackaged, rebranded, resold as one thing that you've never tried before and is the answer to all your problems. It's like creatine, right? At the moment, that has been quite big on social media. It's been around for decades and decades. And so each time it's repackaged, rebranded as something else, or, with something added to it to make it relevant and new and exciting for consumers to buy. So here's a typical story. You've got L-carnitine. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before, but essentially it is a compound the body naturally produces through sort of a metabolic process. And its main physiological role is to help transport fatty acids into the cells, into the mitochondria, where they're oxidized for energy, right? So in theory, more carnitine you have, more fat is transported, therefore more fat is burned, right? So you can kind of see the logic and what is going on here. That's the marketing logic. But obviously what happens internally isn't so simple. So when you look at the studies in relation to this, in practice, the claim versus the evidence is not there. So increase in fat burning, very weak, very inconsistent results. Weight loss, weak, not significant. Improved performance, mixed, maybe a small effect in recovery in a particular segment of users. And so this goes from being, as you can see on the right, maximum strength, 2 times concentration, non-stimulant fat burner with an asterisk, of course, under it, diet support, appetite control, promotes fat loss, all of this kind of stuff, all these claims which kind of get the point across, but are not solid, right? And I know for myself, sort of working in marketing, we had products that had like vitamin B in them and whatever else. And there's things that you can say at certain percentages of the recommended daily allowance, right? So I remember our product, what we had or what we had to market, had like, what was it, 7% of the recommended vitamin B. And so 7% is going to do absolutely fuck all. But you can still say certain things in your marketing. So people will buy this drink thinking, it's going to give me a natural energy boost. In reality, it's not. So, you have to be skeptical and you have to unfortunately call out these things as bullshit half of the time. So unbiased information is out there. And now it really is just a click away. You've got platforms like examine.com, which you can literally search any supplement, and it could be in relation to anything, any supplement that has had, or any sort of compound that has had research done on it, it'll be sort of accumulated here. Equally, ChatGPT can be a great tool for this. Literally just type in what is the best type of creatine, what is creatine used for, what does the evidence say, and you're going to be given a good, well-rounded sort of bit of information that then you can make your judgment on. And a lot of the time, there are red flags and things to watch out for. Anything that is marketed as a quick fix or sounds too good to be true often is. And that goes in like every stream, every walk in life, right? Lose 5 kilos in 7 days, burn fat while you sleep, melt fat fast. All of it. It sounds great. Never going to happen. Broader exaggerated claims. I think one of my favorite ones is like, big pharma hate this product, or PTs hate this product. Because, it kind of puts in your mind that, these people are going to be out of a job. You don't need to train. You don't need pills. You don't need nutrition. Proprietary blends is another big one, which is you may see on the back label of certain supplements. And these proprietary blends basically are there so that the brand don't have to tell you the quantities of the ingredients that there are. So say if, you want 200 milligrams of caffeine, if then a brand had a proprietary blend of it included caffeine, they don't need to say how much is in there. There may be 2 grams or milligrams, sorry. So like you need to watch out for that. You need to sort of understand exactly what is in the product. So we've spoken about aggressive use of celebrity endorsement, claims to replace diet, exercise, treatment. Maybe the price is extremely high with premium ingredients. The product is not certified by independent third-party testing. Maybe, as I was mentioning earlier about the boosters or the formula updates, creatine is something in its purest form has been shown to be super effective. And so how can we make that more exciting year on year with a new update, a new thing to it, which have all been shown to be not as good as or the same as the original product, but probably about 10 times more expensive. And then also, if the supplement belongs to a high risk category, fat loss, bodybuilding, enhancers, this is where you need to sort of double check and really question what you're potentially being sold. And again, just to finish off, I think, our Debbie Downer side of things. There have been many, many, many studies on the actual potency, effectiveness, or the sort of adulteration of some supplements. And so, for example, there was one study around pre-workout supplements, and the caffeine content ranged from 59% to 176% of what was claimed, which is crazy, right? If you're buying something which you expect to have this in it, and it has wildly different quantities in it, then obviously that doesn't help you make an informed choice and can actually be quite dangerous when it comes to things like caffeine. There's also like more herbal boosters. Some of these products had sort of inaccuracies in the labels. For example, ingredients were listed but not detected. Same thing with dietary, slimming, weight loss, herbal blends, ingredients claimed but not detected. So again, you're buying something expecting something is in it, but it's not generally, it's not there. And so this is why it's important to go for trusted brands, brands which have had or show that they are independently tested. Because otherwise, you may not be even buying what you think you're buying, and it's literally just, an expensive trip to the toilet, basically. So I think we've had enough of being a Grinch, Marvin. Do you want to take over here?
I actually remember, I promised you guys a couple stories. I remember, so working in the supplement store, sitting behind a desk, kind of waiting for people to come in, doing my studies in between. And just remember, like, I would always see the same faces every single time. And like almost like clockwork, at the end of the month, this person comes in, this person comes in, this person comes in. Like 4 or 5 times into seeing some of these people, I just wonder, like, but there's no change. Like what's going on? Like, and I'm the one selling them these supplements. I felt like a bit of a fraud myself. So yeah, just really interesting how effective the supplements that I was the one selling to these people were. So I apologize to those people.
They're still coming in, still
Meet
coming
them
in.
again. Yeah, years later, right? I was wrong. So supplements that we do recommend. The first one is, obvious. You guessed it right. Protein supplement. Whether it's a whey, a beef, or a vegan. Obviously, that's dependent on, for example, you would go for a vegan if you are vegan, following a vegan diet, or if you don't potentially process dairy really well, so you would go for a vegan blend. And then beef, if again, you could do a similar thing if you don't process dairy well. And then whey is obviously just a gold standard, right, of whey protein. And Peter's put these brands here purely because we enjoy them, we like them, but also, they are third-party tested. And so what they say they have is exactly what you're going to get. Creatine is, oh, sorry, and just a caveat, obviously, as it says in here, is that these supplements are, meant to be at literally at the top of the iceberg, right? The top of the cherry on top. So diet, nutrition, all those things still need to be catered for. But if you are struggling to get your protein, and then this can come in really handy.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those things where, for example, we have lots of clients who, can only get 2 meals a day, right? So 2 meals a day, 2 servings of protein generally isn't enough to get them to where they want to be. We need to be looking at 3, 4 servings of protein a day. And so these sorts of shakes are very sort of minimal in terms of how much space they take up in the stomach, and so they don't kill the appetite, which is important. And so if there is a client who can only do 2 servings of protein a day, 2 meals, then a good step up is to include a protein supplement to sort of bring them up to that standard. And then it's about how can they potentially add another meal instead of the shake or whatever it might be. Protein supplements too are fantastic when you are going away on holiday, right? You may be staying in a hotel and you've got the breakfast. Yes, there's lunch and dinner, but a lot of the times when you're eating out, the protein servings are quite slim. So what I always like to do is, first thing in the morning, I knock back a couple sort of scoops of protein, and then I'll go down to breakfast and then have whatever there is there. And then at least I've started the day in a place where, I'm working towards my protein goal. And, again, I could probably have another shake or something later on in the day if needs be. But, it just helps you put your mind at ease that you are working towards that protein goal.
Exactly. And then onto the creatine, which again, we've kind of spoken about, being one of the most researched and reliable supplements, proven to be safe and effective. You want to take creatine monohydrate, so don't buy into all the science about creatine hydrochloride or all these other creatine plus this, creatine plus that. Creatine monohydrate in its purest form is by far what you want to go for. And then
And I think also with these, and when we come onto the vitamins and minerals as well, the supplements work when you are consistent with them, right? And this is one of the reasons why we don't recommend supplements to people who aren't necessarily consistent yet across the board with everything. And the reason for that is if someone isn't consistent getting their protein in or getting their training in, then they're not probably going to be likely being consistent getting their creatine, which you have to take on a daily basis because it saturates within the body and builds up gradually over time. So if you are, only remembering or only taking your supplements when you remember, and don't get me wrong, I'm sort of guilty of this as well. But like if you're only taking it when you remember, then you're not getting the actual benefit of it, right? Especially when it's something like creatine, which builds up in the body over time. So that's just something to be mindful of is if you are going to be taking supplements, don't put them in the cupboard and hope you remember each morning. Literally, just like we talk about the habits, put them in a place where you can see them, you're reminded by them, and that you're actually going to take them to build that habit initially. Otherwise, you're not going to get the benefit from them.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, Pete, like the reason why, well, like we kind of touched on it, right? Of like you need to be knocking or doing all your other behaviors first, right? Before you then take supplements. Because supplements, unlike, okay, maybe caffeine is really the only one where you feel like an immediate sort of feeling or benefit, right? Whereas your creatines and all the other things, you're not going to feel an immediate effect. And so the more consistent you are with everything else first, then the more these other things are going to be effective because you're taking care of your pillars first, and then the supplementation, and then consistent supplementation as well will then, assist you with that. So caffeine along with creatine, so those two are by far the most studied supplements for as long as supplements have existed. These two have been studied significantly well. And there's obviously evidence supporting that it supports endurance, strength, power, mental focus, alertness. But we want to make sure that we're not using this as a band-aid to get you through if sleep and nutrition are not prioritized first. And again, when we spoke about the sleep habits and things like that, we obviously want to limit caffeine by a certain time frame so that we can get into a nice deep sleep when we do get to bed because of that half-life of the caffeine. And then we also don't want to use it as a band-aid, right? Because if you are having to use caffeine as a band-aid and you need your caffeine fix, you need your coffee, otherwise you're going to be grumpy and grouchy and everything, then it points to a bigger problem, right? Always think of the root, like what is the root issue? And it's probably because your sleep's not good. So fix the sleep first before you reach for the caffeine or the pre-workout or whatever the case may be. Vitamins and minerals, obviously these are really important for all your, vital functions that happen in your body. And you want to do this from a place of knowing rather than guessing. So we mentioned previously that blood work is the best way to do this. But then there's obviously the obvious ones, right? Living here where we have the sun all day, but we don't get out often enough. I would bet my bottom dollar that, well, we do know that 60 odd % plus of people in this country and in this region are deficient in vitamin D. So I'm sure one or two or three of us in here are definitely deficient there as well. So again, blood work first, find out what you're deficient in, and then you can then look to supplement. And these are just some brands that we've added in here that we know for sure, again, are third-party tested. What's in the supplements is what they say is in the supplements is what's in there.
Yes, I think sort of Amani's just come up with something in the chat, and sometimes it's about the bioavailability of the stuff that you're getting from your food, right? So sometimes even though you're supposedly getting this amount of X compound from this sort of meal or this ingredient, it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the whole thing. Right. So, one that comes to mind really is when I had a housemate back in uni who wouldn't buy protein powder, but he would knock back 6 to 8 eggs, raw eggs at a time. Right. So, there should be let's say in 8 eggs, there should be, oh God, my maths is going to be bad. It's going to be like 40 to 50 grams of protein, right? In sort of that amount of eggs. However, when the eggs aren't cooked in a certain way, or when they just aren't cooked, the bioavailability of the protein within those raw eggs isn't as much. So if you think you're getting 45 grams, maybe you're only getting like 20, 25. And so, as Amani says, like if you are looking to sort of focus on addressing some deficiencies, then if, for example, maybe you are deficient in zinc, maybe you should look at, okay, how can I ensure that the zinc I'm taking in or the foods that I'm taking in is readily bioavailable? Do I need to combine it with something to make sure it is absorbed in a certain way? Because correct me if I'm wrong, Marvin, here, but like things like creatine as well, there needs to be some sort of sugar to assist with, or glucose to assist with sort of absorption.
The
Is that right?
transport, yeah, yeah, generally. So I remember, um, and this is why, again, one of those blend type proprietary blend thing would become a thing with creatine, where I remember there's a supplement I used to sell, which was creatine. I forgot the name of it, but it had like flavors and all that sort of stuff. But then excess sugar, right? Because lo and behold, these companies want to make money. But yes, Pete is right about that. For optimal absorption, you can do, which is why it's nice to just pop it in your shake. Because generally, you're probably going to have a banana in there. You're probably going to have some berries, which will take care of that sugar and that extra transport. And then into the supplements that we don't recommend, which is basically everything but what we've just spoken about. So fat burners, BCAAs, the proprietary blends, all these extra creatines, right? The hydrochloride that I mentioned earlier, ethyl ester, L-carnitine, CLA, CoQ10, pre-workouts, nitric oxide boosters, herbal blend, like all sorts of all this extra stuff that is essentially claiming that they have this, that, and the third, but it probably is not the case. But a quick touch on the top two, fat burners and BCAAs, because I would imagine these are the most common and potentially pre-workouts, like how these work, right? So fat burners, essentially, there's just a lot of caffeine, right? And so what they do is it suppresses your appetite because you're having caffeine. But that's probably not a good thing, because if you suppress your appetite so far that you now probably can't get enough protein, right? So you're now going to not be able to get the protein that you need to support your body. If you're in a fat loss phase, you need enough protein to support muscle loss and all that sort of stuff, recovery. But there's also the potential that you become nutrient deficient because you're not eating enough, right? So remember, we want to be in a calorie deficit if we're losing body fat, but not so steep and so deep that you also lose energy, you're struggling and, basically just slugging through life. BCAAs we don't recommend, because if you're getting enough protein from your food and potentially a protein shake, then you don't need to have the BCAAs, because that is catered for and covered within your protein. Pete, you had some decent history with pre-workouts that you spoke about earlier in the beginning.
Yes, and I think a lot of it is, and I would like, they all put different ingredients, and there's one ingredient that some put in called beta alanine,
Oh yes,
and this is the
indeed.
one that makes you feel like you want to like bite your lips off and itch your skin off. And I kid you not, like it's a horrible feeling where it kind of tingles your whole body. And so again, the jury's out on whether beta alanine is significant in terms of the benefits that it gives. But from a consumer point of view, if I'm drinking something that has caffeine in it, it makes my skin itchy. Man, I'm gonna have a fucking awesome workout, especially for that, teenager, gym rat kind of person, right? And so I think pre-workouts are great for me, I use them every now and again from a like just a fun point of view, right? You're like, I'm feeling okay today. Oh, I could like step up my training today with a bit of a pre-workout. I'm feeling it. Whereas if you're taking it before every single workout, you then build up your caffeine tolerance, so it doesn't have as much of a hit. And then equally, you then can't train without it. It's kind of got that placebo effect of, okay, I need it to train and to be able to perform well. If I don't have my pre-workout, then, my session is going to be terrible. So, that is sort of one thing there on the pre-workout. I think the other thing here is just herbal blends. A lot of the time, I think we like to think that natural is best and it's kind of as nature intended sort of way. But again, sort of dosing of these things, actual efficacy of these things is out in terms of like, does it actually do anything? Is the result actually worth it? And most of the time, it's not really. So again, these sorts of things, you can sort of look at the evidence based on just literally ChatGPT to get a sort of a comprehensive review of the claims, and then also what it is, sort of what does the evidence say? And then also just the last one, anything from your favorite influencer. Everyone's being sort of given money to promote whatever. And so you really have to be skeptical about that as well.
Yeah, that's a funny one. I still train a few clients in person, and I've been having this back and forth with one client that telling me about some glucose goddess. I'm not on Instagram, so I'm not familiar, but apparently this person is going around telling people that sugar that sugar, regardless of the form that it comes in, is bad for you. So essentially, don't eat fruit ever. And lo and behold, did some research, and she's selling some sort of supplement or program or something. And so, surprise, surprise, right? Is what's happening there.
And then just on the comment made on Athletic Greens, this is the sort of AG1 stuff because I've heard a lot about it from like advertisements on podcasts. That's about it. But I did just sort of have a sort of a look up while Marvin was talking, and apparently there's been some controversy about proprietary blends and does it contain the ingredients it says, and so like I think the big thing here when it comes to like modern day supplements and brands and all that kind of stuff, they're all pushing this kind of lifestyle, this aspirational lifestyle. And it is, are you the type of person who has Athletic Greens? Are you kind of aligning yourself to the sort of brand aspiration lifestyle that the influencers or whoever has? And so I think they go heavy on that rather than necessarily the benefits. And so if you're lacking the benefits, then you obviously need to go hard on the marketing claims, the lifestyle that you'll get if you take this product. And I mean, that's kind of what marketing is anyway for many, many years. So I'm not too sure about Athletic Greens. Have you heard anything about Athletic Greens, Marvin?
I haven't heard the controversy, but I think it's interesting that even the bigger podcasts will probably still, be sponsored by these supplements. So just because Joe Rogan or Andrew Huberman, like, even the most quote unquote most science-based people, like at the end of the day, they need to make money. They need to make a living. Like, a Stanford professor is not going to sit behind a screen and talk to millions of people and not make money from it, right? He's well educated. He spent all these years, getting a good education. And so still needs to make money from it, right? And so, don't be surprised if even the most, well-respected, quote unquote, influencers is sponsored by some sort of supplement. Again, like Pete said, go to ChatGPT, check properly and see. Go to Science Daily is another good one as well. Examine.com as well are some good options.
BioLane is a good source of information
Yes,
as well.
that's one you can trust for sure.
Maybe we'll share him in the group as well.
Exactly.
Now, final thoughts. Where do we get to? Okay, Marvin, you can go through your fancy checklist.
Thanks for recognizing, Pete. So essentially created this checklist, which can be a really nice sort of cheat sheet. Screen grab it and just kind of use this of like, if yes, then you probably don't need it. If no, then you focus here first, right? So sleep, for example, are you sleeping 7 to 9 hours? If no, then you probably need to improve sleep hygiene, stress, bedtime routine. We've spoken about that. And then a supplement might help if you optimize your sleep habits, but then still struggle. And then it's like, okay, maybe I should look into, magnesium, L-theanine, because you're potentially deficient in magnesium and therefore you're not sleeping well. Exactly the same thing goes for, are you eating mostly whole and minimally processed foods? If no, then prioritize meal planning, having balanced macronutrients, getting your fruits and vegetables in. And then if your diet is solid, but you still need extra support, then maybe you go for the multivitamins, maybe you go for the omega-3s. You've done some blood tests, comes back that you're still deficient in something, then, go for those. Training, obviously, that's a big one, really important to stay, very consistent with that. And we've spoken about how creatine and whey protein, could work well together there if just to support your training, not as a replacement. Are we moving daily outside? Are we, getting some sunlight? Are we getting our steps in? If not, then let's do that. Increase your steps, reduce that sedentary time of just sitting behind a desk, or sitting on the couch and lounging all day, get active, start moving, go get your steps in, go to the Corniche, go to in Riyadh, what's the famous sports cycling
Boulevard.
thing? Boulevard? Yes, that's it. Get moving, get your feet moving and get some blood flow going through your body. And then, of course, have you had blood work done in the past year? And if you haven't, then we definitely do recommend that you do that, right? Schedule that with a doctor. And then once those deficiencies are identified, then you're not guessing anymore, right? You're not wondering, oh, am I, should I? You can actually have a much more calculated and, proper approach with your doctor as well.
And so questions to ask yourself, sort of when you are considering something, have I mastered the basics? Will the supplement have an impact? Are you operating at 40%? Taking any supplement at that point is not going to really do anything, other than, focusing on your consistency across the board and everything else. Is it worth the cost, or would my money be spent better elsewhere? So this is always a funny one, especially when I was sort of working previously, sort of in a gym. You'd get some trainers who, after the first consultation would be literally trying to get the client to buy 5 or 6 different supplements, right? And that could be anywhere from like, 200, 300 real per supplement. And so it's a question of, okay, is it worth getting these supplements, or do I, choose something like Callow, something that will give me, structure and a set number of servings of protein a day? Is my money going to be better spent elsewhere? Am I looking for a shortcut, or am I looking to optimize what I'm already doing? And so again, think about, okay, why do I want this supplement? Pause and think, okay, is it because, I feel like it's going to help me lose fat and I can't be bothered to kind of calorie count or something like that? Or is it a case of, okay, I'm absolutely crushing everything at the moment. What else can I do to like optimize for like an extra 2%, an extra 3%? Is there a strong, unbiased evidence supporting these claims? So again, you can always come to myself or Marvin. You can always look at ChatGPT, or, do a little bit of desk research to sort of back up why you're using it and why it may benefit you. And also another one is, am I clear on dosage and timings to maximize the benefit? So just because you are taking a supplement, it doesn't necessarily mean you're taking it in the right dose that'll be relevant for the goal or the outcome that you want, right? And so a lot of these things, they can be lower in the sort of the dose, and also you need to take into account things like body weight, gender, all of that kind of stuff too. So it's not just about taking a pill, but actually, is it is it going to be bioavailable? Is it the right dosage? Do I need to time it with food? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? So it's important for you to think of these things too, as well as, am I going to be consistent with it? So over to you, Marvin, for closing thoughts.
So, to finish off, what has been a very, very interesting conversation around supplements, we really want to hammer home the point that they can be incredibly useful, right? But you need to be using these wisely. They can fill in the gaps, support recovery, enhance performance, optimize longevity, but they never ever replace the fundamentals. Those 4 big pillars we spoke about earlier: sleep, proper nutrition, training, and just daily movement, right? So if you're doing those things first, then and only then can you then look to optimize, as Peter said as well. And obviously, when you get that right, then supplements become what they're meant to be, the cherry on top, as we sort of call this call. So it's really important to make sure that those main pillars and those big drivers are being done, and consistently too, right? It doesn't make sense for you to be, nailing everything 80, 90, 100% on things for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and think, okay, I've been solid, I've been consistent. Okay, now I need to take a supplement. Do this for months, 3, 6 months, and then only once you've, been very consistent with that, can you then potentially look at, adding some supplements to optimize everything there. Any thoughts, Pete?
No, I think we've been the boring folk, haven't we, really? I think, yeah, like it's one of those things where it can be an incredibly like exciting topic, because again, it's like Yeah, I remember stepping into the first supplement store I went into, and there's so much choice. It's so overwhelming, but also so exciting. And there's bright colors and big claims and all of this stuff. So it's only natural to be, thinking that these things are going to have a big impact on you. And as I said at the beginning, right, we've all been down this road before where we have tried something and it's not as we expected, or we totally over exaggerated what we were going to get out of it. And that can be across anything. So, myself and you, Marvin, we have obviously been through the supplement game. And now for me, all I take is, consistently is a whey protein and a creatine. And to be honest, after this, I'm going to think about sort of what other more kind of health and well-being stuff can I bring in, for example, the omega 3s, maybe look at vitamin D, those sorts of things, which I think will, help from a more health and well-being point of view as I'm getting older, to be honest.
But that's because you're consistent, right, with everything else. You're not looking for the vitamin D to, band-aid something, right? You are wanting to optimize.
Exactly, exactly.